On September 8, 2006, the 5 states of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, signed a treaty establishing a nuclear weapons-free zone. The treaty aims to reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation and nuclear-armed terrorism. Non-proliferation measures of nuclear weapons, new security approaches. Government representatives and some non-governmental organizations, NGOs, they participate from July 22nd to August 2nd, 2024 in Geneva, Switzerland, at the preparatory session of the Review Conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. As the political and strategic situation in the world can evolve over time, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, had, as one of its provisions, Article 8, that a review conference is held every 5 years to judge the situation and evaluate whether new elements should be added. At the end of each review, all states present must agree to a President's Statement. Disarmament Negotiation of the United Nations. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which had taken 10 years to negotiate, was proclaimed in 1970, and the first review conference was held in Geneva in 1975. As the review conference was a meeting of states parties to the treaty and not an ordinary meeting of the United Nations, disarmament negotiation, NGO representatives had more opportunities to interact with governments. The NGO texts were considered official documents and were printed and distributed by the conference secretariat. Professor René Wadlow chaired a group of participating NGOs between 1975 and 1980. As a result of having chaired the NGOs in the 1975 review, he was invited to Moscow to discuss with Soviet military and arms control specialists. Since then, he has continued to be concerned about these problems. The 3 fundamental aspects of the treaty. Each review conference has addressed the 3 fundamental aspects of the treaty: non-proliferation, promotion of peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and the disarmament efforts of the 5 nuclear weapon states when the treaty was signed: United States, USSR, the United Kingdom, France and China, as established in Article 6. To make things more complicated but politically realistic, the policies of nuclear weapon states who have not signed the Treaty of Not Nuclear Weapons Proliferation, India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, color the debates of each review. Iran is a state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, but questions have been raised about the effectiveness of the International Atomic Energy Agency's control over Iran's peaceful nuclear activities and whether nuclear material is being enriched to weapons production levels. An elephant in the room. Israel's nuclear weapons and their significance for Middle East policies have long been an elephant in the room, too big not to notice, but too dangerous to address them if you want to do more in the review process. In 1995, there was an annex to the President's final statement on the review proposing that a conference should be convened on a Middle East potentially free of nuclear weapons. In practice, the time never came, but the concept is still there. The Rapaki Plan. The concept of nuclear weapon-free zones has been an important concept in regional disarmament and conflict reduction efforts. The creation of a nuclear weapons-free zone was first proposed by the Polish Foreign Minister, Adam Rapaki, at the UN General Assembly in October 1957, barely a year after the uprising in Hungary was crushed. The crushing of the Hungarian revolt by Soviet troops and unrest among Polish workers at the same time, they showed that the East-West balance in Central Europe was unstable, with the Soviet Union and the United States in possession of nuclear weapons, and perhaps willing to use them if the political situation became radically unstable. The Rapaki Plan, as it became known, called for the denuclearization of East and West Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Polonia. NATO powers. They opposed the Rapaki Plan. The plan went through several variants that included its expansion to cover the reduction of armed forces and weapons, and, as a preliminary step, the freezing of nuclear weapons in the area. NATO powers opposed to the Rapaki Plan, partly because he recognized the legitimacy of the East German state. It was not until 1970 and the beginning of what became the Helsinki Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, serious negotiations began in 1975 on troop and weapons levels in Europe. While the Rapaki Plan never led to negotiations on nuclear weapons, policies in Europe had the merit of restarting the East-West discussions, who were then at a stalemate after the Hungarian uprising. The Treaty of Tlatelolco. The first nuclear weapons-free zone that was negotiated. The Treaty of Tlatelolco was a direct consequence of the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. It is difficult to know how close it was to a nuclear exchange between the US and the USSR. The only certainty is that the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was the motivating engine for Latin American leaders to move into action. Although Latin America was not an area in which military confrontation was as raw as in Europe, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a warning that it was not necessary to have armies facing each other for there to be danger. Denuclearization of Latin America. Mexico, under the leadership of Ambassador Alfonso Garcia Robles at the UN, he immediately began calling for the denuclearization of Latin America. There were a series of conferences, and in February 1967, it was signed in Tlatelolco, Mexico, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America. For an important arms control treaty, Tlatelolco was negotiated in a short time, due in part to fear inspired by the Cuban Missile Crisis, but especially to the energy and perseverance of Garcia Robles and the expert advice of William Epstein, UN Disarmament Director. The treaty established a control system, permanent and effective, containing a series of new elements and pioneers, as well as a body to oversee the treaty. Superman is not coming to rid the world of nuclear weapons. On September 8, 2006, the 5 states from Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan signed a treaty that establishes a nuclear weapons-free zone. The treaty aims to reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation and nuclear-armed terrorism. The treaty prohibits the production, acquisition, and deployment of nuclear weapons and its components, as well as nuclear explosives. It is important to note that the treaty prohibits the transport of nuclear weapons since both Russia and the United States have established military air bases in Central Asia, where nuclear weapons could have been placed in times of crisis in Asia. Superman is not coming to rid the world of nuclear weapons. The citizens of the world must take care of the problem themselves to the UN delegates. Leadership for a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. It's an unfortunate aspect of world politics that actions are normally taken constructive institution building only because of a crisis. Perhaps growing pressures in the Middle East could lead to concerted leadership for a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. The International Atomic Energy Organization has the technical knowledge to establish said zone. Now there needs to be leadership within the Middle East, as well as the international community in general. There are urgent needs for new approaches, common security. If you liked this video, we invite you to subscribe to this channel, like it, and activate the notification bell, and share our video among your family and friends. See you soon.